All right, family, come closer. Let me ask you this. When was the last time African leaders truly listened to each other, not just out of formality, but from a place of shared struggle and destiny? When did the voices of nations under pressure, under threat, under siege, finally get heard at the highest levels? This week in Ouagadougou, something powerful unfolded, something that didn't make global headlines, but might just signal a shift in how African nations confront their challenges. Together. On June 17, 2025, in the heart of Burkina Faso's capital, a meeting took place between Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso, and Antonio Téte, the special envoy of Angolan President João Lourenço, who currently holds the rotating presidency of the African Union. But this wasn't just a diplomatic formality, it was a listening mission, an acknowledgement that what's happening in the Sahel can no longer be treated as a distant crisis. It was, in many ways, Africa turning its ear to its own heartbeat. Too often in international politics, smaller or embattled nations are talked about but not talked to. That's what made this encounter so significant. Antonio Téte came bearing a message, but not just one from Angola. He came representing the African Union's concern, solidarity, and above all, willingness to engage on a human level. He made it clear from the start, this was not a lecture. It was a listening mission. We came to listen to the president of Faso about the challenges facing the region and the country, Téte explained, and to explore what collective paths we Africans can take to solve the problems each region of our continent faces. What a powerful statement. Not solutions imposed from above, not generic development packages from foreign donors, but collective paths forged in African soil, informed by the lived realities of the people on the ground. This visit marks a departure from the outdated model where decisions affecting millions are made in distant conference rooms. It's a signal that perhaps, just perhaps, the African Union is beginning to embody its deeper potential, a platform not only for coordination, but for compassion, collaboration, and continental courage. We want to take a moment to thank all our loyal Voice of Africa subscribers and family. We deeply appreciate your support, your comments, your shares, and your belief in this mission. If you love what we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. You can also support us with a super thanks. It helps us grow and amplify African voices even more. Let's keep this momentum alive. Back to the story. What did Captain Traoré share in that closed-door meeting? Official sources didn't reveal everything, but the tone afterward made one thing clear. His words were deeply impactful. The Sahel is in crisis, yes, but it's not in chaos. There's a difference. The region, especially Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, is undergoing what some are calling a second liberation, this time not from colonial powers directly, but from dependency, exploitation, and the systems that keep Africa fragmented. Traoré likely conveyed what he has consistently told his people. The security crisis is real, but it is being met head-on. Burkina Faso is not asking for pity. It is demanding respect. It is reclaiming agency. And it is reaching out, not for foreign intervention, but for African partnership. In Antonio Téte's words, the African Union is guided by the principle of non-indifference. That's a strong statement. Non-indifference means that African nations no longer have the luxury to pretend that instability in the Sahel doesn't affect them. The same way Burkina Faso's fight against terrorism, disinformation, and economic strangulation ripples across borders, so too must the response. For decades, African diplomacy has often been seen through the prism of external validation. Meetings with the IMF, the World Bank, the EU, or the UN are treated with more fanfare than intra-African dialogue. But this encounter challenges that mindset. By prioritizing a listening mission to Burkina Faso, a country suspended not long ago by the same African Union, it sends a message. We're evolving. We're shifting from punishment to participation, from sanctions to solidarity. And that's crucial because the transitional governments in the Sahel are not anomalies. They are reflections of deep systemic failures, failures that cannot be corrected by bureaucracy alone. They require empathy. They require dialogue. They require Africans speaking to Africans. And let's not forget, this visit comes at a time when there are growing calls to lift AU suspensions on countries in political transition. Could this be the beginning of a reintegration? Could it be that the African Union is ready to recognize the legitimacy of new political dynamics emerging in the Sahel, especially when driven by the will of the people? There was a moment, captured briefly in Antonio Téte's post-meeting remarks, that should give every African pause. He spoke about exploring ways and means to solidify the bridge between Africans and to reinforce the spirit of African solidarity and shared destiny. Let that sink in. A shared destiny. How often do we hear that in African politics? This wasn't a vague Pan-Africanist slogan. It was a reflection of growing urgency. Africa cannot afford to remain divided. The continent's struggles, be they security, economic, or environmental, are deeply interconnected. What happens in Burkina Faso today affects Senegal, Ghana, Cameroon, and even South Africa tomorrow. And that's why this meeting mattered. Because behind the official titles, the suits, and the press statements lies a more profound truth. If Africans do not stand for each other, no one else will. Captain Traoré has been a vocal proponent of regional unity. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso joined hands with Mali and Niger to form the Alliance of Sahel States, a defense and political coalition born out of necessity, but growing into something far more visionary. The AU's listening mission acknowledges that. It gives weight to this alliance not as a rogue deviation, but as a legitimate voice in the continental conversation. So where does this lead? One possibility is that the African Union, under João Lourenço's presidency, will push for more active reintegration of suspended states on the condition that they are building credible, locally driven transitions. It also opens the door for deeper military and economic cooperation among AU members in confronting terrorism, food insecurity, and illicit arms trafficking. Another hope is that more African leaders will follow Angola's example and initiate listening missions of their own, not just to Burkina Faso, but to the DRC, to Sudan, to Guinea, to the Central African Republic, to truly know the pain and the promise of their neighbors, not through Western media lenses, but with their own eyes and hearts. But the biggest outcome of all? Perception shift. The perception of countries like Burkina Faso is changing, from failed states to frontline defenders of African dignity, from isolated rebels to visionary reformers, from aid recipients to agenda setters, and if the African Union is listening, really listening, that shift may soon become official policy. This meeting may not dominate international headlines, but for those who understand the pulse of this continent, it was monumental, because it wasn't just about one president meeting one envoy. It was about Africa listening to itself. It was about African challenges being met with African ears, African hearts, and African solutions. And if that continues, if listening becomes the first step toward deeper cooperation, healing, and sovereignty, then this quiet moment in Ouagadougou might be remembered as the start of something truly historic. Let the world watch in silence. Let the doubters whisper from the sidelines. Africa is beginning to speak in its own voice, and for once, it is listening too. If you believe in this vision, support this platform. Like, share, and subscribe to Voice of Africa. Leave a comment and let us know what you think about this powerful exchange. Do you believe the African Union is finally beginning to take real steps toward unity and solidarity? Or is there still a long way to go? Let's talk about it, because Africa's story is still being written, and you are part of the ink.